Welcome to week 4. 2 additional readings and 1 chapter in our text. We're going to start with those additional readings first, beginning with Kakala 2016. This study looks at how the information environment defines a new way of perceiving the space defined once as a battlefield. In other words, information warfare. This is focused on the military, but information warfare applies to practically every organization. Okay, they may not call it warfare, but there is definitely a battle going on when it comes to information, specifically gaining attention in the information age, and some of the ethical principles that go along with that. Your author talks about how an adequate response to the new challenges of the contemporary environment, or what we're living today, seems to be the concept of strategic communication. Now understand, strategic communication has been around a long time, but there really has been a renewed emphasis on the value that strategic communication can play, and more specifically, in what roles within an organization belong to strategic communication. So the author talks about how in 2004, the Defense Department defined strategic communication as a combination of the following elements: information operations, public diplomacy, international broadcasting services, and public affairs. I was a public affairs officer. In fact, in 2004, I was serving as a Pentagon press officer. And so I remember well when the Department of Defense came out with this announcement. And there were some people in the public affairs realm who were concerned, and their concerns were valid because they felt like that if they were being lumped into this larger strategic communication warfare, they might be lost in the mix, or if they kind of mixed up with the information operations, which is either closely related or sometimes includes psychological operations or psyops, that their credibility might suffer. Again, I understand that. I kind of fell on the other camp. I felt like it was a good opportunity to partner with those who were in information operations and public diplomacy and international broadcasting services to kind of focus our efforts on those things that needed to be communicated to the public, which is our responsibility as public affairs officers. Now, part of my experience that I had was at previous commands. I had been a spokesperson for the U.S. Pacific Fleet, and we worked on some things that I can't talk about in the public setting, but essentially public affairs and information operations, including psychological operations, work together to communicate and develop these plans, a part of which was communication. And the one thing I learned is that their goal is much the same as ours, which is to inform. Now, they're much more on the influencing side than we are. We're supposed to be more, this is the information, we have a public responsibility, maximum information, maximum disclosure, minimum delay. We want to get as much information out as possible because, it's our responsibility to the public. If you want to dig a little deeper, you can look at the definitions that are on pages 38 through 39. Anyway, I thought I'd share that kind of personal anecdote. I thought it might help lend some maybe a little bit deeper knowledge in terms of strategic communication within the Defense Department. Okay, so now let's look at our second reading, which is Lin Wan and Stacks. This study examines how strategic leadership influences internal public relations. And one thing that I am guilty of, and I think that if other public affairs practitioners are honest, they will admit that they're guilty of as well, is that we sometimes overlook internal information. It's one of the reasons I chose this article, because I think we need to remind ourselves the importance of internal information. This study proposed how to examine transparency and authenticity in the context of organizational internal communication. And of course, there's lots of evidence that shows how effective internal communication plays a vital role in developing positive employee attitudes such as trust, organizational commitment, job satisfaction, organizational identification, and this positive employee organizational relationships. Now, if we were teaching a human resource class, or maybe you've got a human resource background, you would understand what a gold mine that would be. So if you can use internal communication to help positively influence all those aspects of human relations, the employee commitment, you should do so. And that's why using and understanding and appreciating internal information is critical for anyone that is in strategic communication or wants to learn more about the strategic communication field. Okay, let's move to our text, chapter 11. We get into a little bit deeper understanding of ethics. If you've taken an ethics class before, some of this will be review, but let me kind of hit the wave tops for you. Three ethical perspectives that the authors talk about, and these are very common. One is deontology, two is utilitarianism, and then three, this idea of justice. So we'll start with deontology. Deontology, if you break out that word deon, that's the Greek word for duty. So when you think about deontology, think about your duty. We make ethical choices based upon our duty, based upon universal truths. Closely related, but certainly distinct, is utilitarianism. And this is the notion that we make ethical choices based upon consequences. Okay, we try to do the most good for the most number of people. That is utilitarianism. You take a utilitarian approach to ethics. And then there's the notion of justice. And this is that fairness balances the need to honor the equality of all citizens with the recognition that people differ in economic standing, status, and abilities. We are hearing a lot about justice in our society. Now, we may not label it in an ethical perspective, but trust me, the underlying principle upon which this tension is riding upon is justice, all kinds of justice, and the ethical considerations surrounding justice. Okay, your authors also talk about how virtues are caught more than they are taught. And I believe this as a parent. I believe it as a leader. Hopefully you do too. Our followers will often do what they see more than what we say. You can talk all you want, but what do you do? That's what matters most. We learn what it means to be just and generous and honest by seeing those qualities in exemplary leaders. Your authors also talk about the four processes, or sometimes referred to as components, that lead to that ethical behavior. These include moral sensitivity, moral judgment, moral motivation, and moral action. Again, that action speaking louder than words. All right. Johnson and Hackman recommend that you can increase your moral motivation and that of your followers by creating an ethically rewarding environment while managing your emotions. They recommend you try to catch people doing good and reward them for it. Often the good things that people do are just taken for granted and overlooked. And I get it. I've been a leader for my whole life, and oftentimes we find ourselves focusing on, the challenges, including sometimes the challenging people within the organization who need more attention. And I get that. You can't ignore that. But you can't ignore those who are constantly doing good things, who are doing the things that we want done within the organization, and rewarding them and giving them the attention that they deserve as well, right? So don't always focus on, the tough part or the challenges. Instead, make sure that you give justice to those who are doing the good work, because that will result in a much more positive environment, and give those people who are doing the good work the positive motivation they need to continue that good work. Okay, part of this chapter involves a quick discussion of a person by the name of Ira Shaleff. I met Ira at an international public affairs symposium probably a decade or more ago, and I was impressed with his passion to help followers. And Ira's kind of carved out a niche in terms of the leader-follower relationship, right? A lot of us do studies on leadership. I write about leadership. I teach leadership. I have a degree in leadership. All these things about leadership. You don't have leaders without followers, and that's where Ira comes in. And so the authors talk a little bit about the courage that accepts, the higher risk of being a follower and understanding that followership and what that followership means. You can look Ira up if you want. He goes by Courageous Follower, so you can find him online. A lot of good information in there in terms of followership. Okay, I encourage you to review box 11.7. You'll find this on page 386. There, the authors compare traditional bosses with servant leaders. I can teach a whole course on servant leadership. I could teach an entire lecture on servant leadership. I can only tell you in just a few seconds how important servant leadership is. I was fortunate early in my career as a junior officer in the Navy. I was led by a servant leader. I was introduced to servant leadership, and subsequent to that, I have led and followed many servant leaders. And so I appreciate the value of servant leadership and how important it is to not do things for yourself and not to be focused on your superiors, but rather to use your very limited time and the other very limited resources you have focused on your followers, serving those followers so that those followers can carry out your organization's mission. All right, a quote to finish us off this week from Albert Schweitzer, who said, "The only ones among you who will be truly happy are those who have sought and found how to serve." Leadership is about service. All right, as I remind you every week, stay ahead with all assignments, stay engaged in the discussion board, and of course, enjoy this time of learning.